Anybody has questions for Ari? I'm happy to take your question cards. Thanks, Phil. I owe you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the annual Jewish Alliance campaign event. We are thrilled to be chairing this event this year. It's outstanding to see so many people here tonight. We've had over 425 people registered for the event, and it's obviously a full house. Those of you that know my wife, Pam, know that she's a CNN junkie. So much so, she even calls her favorite CNN hosts her boyfriends. Jake Tapper, Chris Cuomo, and yes, even Anderson Cooper. Don't ask. I suspect that after tonight, she'll have one more name on the boyfriend list, and maybe even learn to turn the channel from CNN.
This event is a way of celebrating you, our donors who are responsible for the success of the annual campaign. Without your dedication and commitment to work the Alliance, none of the programs and services you'll hear about tonight would be possible. So thank you all. It is wonderful to see both longtime donors and new faces in the crowd tonight. This has been an exciting year of change and growth at the Alliance as we embark on our strategic plan. It is our pleasure to introduce Adam Greenman, President and CEO of the Alliance, to speak about the Jewish community journey.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Pam and Jeff, for serving as our co-chairs tonight and for all you do for the community. It's been wonderful to work with you on this event, and I truly appreciate that whenever the Alliance calls, you answer that call, so thank you. I also want to thank Jamie Pius, our board chair, and our entire board of directors for their leadership and their stewardship of this organization. You're true partners in this work, and I'm so glad to be working with all of you to make our community stronger and more vibrant. It's so wonderful to see so many people in this room today. I think this is the biggest crowd that we've had in my time here at the Alliance. An event like this takes a tremendous amount of work and planning behind the scenes, and I'm grateful to my colleagues here at the Alliance who work tirelessly for this community. Could the staff that are in the room just give a quick wave? Actually, I think they're all outside the room, but could we just give them a quick round of applause? Thank you for being such great colleagues and for all the work you do to help lead this community. I want to give a special thanks to Sarah Masri, to Seth Finkel, and to Michelle Gallagher, who were the team that really spearheaded tonight, so thank you all. I'm I'm actually amazed to see so many of you here tonight, especially knowing that there's a Patriots game starting at 8:30. I've promised a lot of people in this room that we would get you out of here by 8, and I plan to keep that promise. As many of you know, I'm from Philadelphia, and therefore I'm an Eagles fan. It actually says right here, pause for booze. Now, Patriots fans wouldn't understand this, but when your team is not undefeated, you have some time during games to let your mind wander. A few weeks ago, I was watching the Eagles get absolutely clobbered, and my mind drifted to the ways that the Patriots and what they've been able to accomplish over the last 2 decades is just so remarkable. I thought about the fact that in many ways, what Bill Belichick and Tom Brady have been able to do is very similar to the types of things that help build a strong and vibrant community. A successful team and a strong community both require collaboration. The offense, the defense, and the special teams all have to work together to get the team a win. While there have been years when Brady's offense has carried the day, this year the defense is an incredible complement. Collaboration is also the key to success in our community as well. At the Alliance, we work hard to collaborate with synagogues and agencies in our community, recognizing that we all have a special and specific role to play in making our Jewish community stronger and more vibrant. That means making sure that a member of a synagogue who's experiencing a crisis can get help through Jewish Collaborative Services. Your support of our campaign makes that possible. It also means giving day campers here at the Dwars JCC the opportunity to experience what overnight camp feels like at Camp Jordan. Your support of our campaign makes that possible. And it allows the Alliance to bring agencies and synagogues together for trainings on security, for LGBTQ+ inclusion, and on creating safer spaces for all people. Your support for our campaign makes that possible. You make collaboration possible. Good teams also have clarity. Everyone from the owner to the front office to the players on the field understands what the mission is. Not only do they all know that the ultimate goal is winning the Super Bowl, but the best teams understand exactly how they will get there. At the Alliance, we're seeking that greater clarity now, and we need your help. As Jeff and Pam said, so many of you have already participated in our strategic planning process, either by taking our survey or by participating in any number of the small living room conversations that are happening across our community. If you've not had the opportunity yet to share your voice in this process, please visit our website, jewishallianceri.org, or pick up the latest issue of Jewish Rhode Island, which we've got plenty of copies available in the lobby. In the Jewish Rhode Island, there's a hard copy of the survey, and we hope you'll take one and fill it out. Your thoughts and those of your fellow community members will help us articulate where our community should be going in the next few years and how we can continue to make this community strong and more vibrant. In short, it'll bring clarity to all of our work. Finally, winning teams have commitment. Every player, every fan, every person associated with the team is committed to the ultimate goal. Looking out at this room, it's clear to me how great the commitment is for a stronger, more vibrant Jewish community here in Rhode Island. All of you have invested in our ability to build community. And thanks to you, we have raised over $1.3 million already for our 2020 annual campaign. Thank you. And we're well on our way to achieving our goal of $3.1 million. If you have not yet made your contribution to the annual campaign, we hope you'll do so this evening. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight, for collaborating with us, for helping us to bring clarity to our work and to our goals, and for your continued commitment to a stronger, more vibrant Jewish community here in Rhode Island and around the world. Thank you. It's now my honor to introduce my partner in this work, somebody who embodies collaboration, clarity, and commitment to the Alliance and to the Patriots, our board chair, Jamie Pius.
Yes, I'm a Patriot fan. Thank you, Adam, and to each and every one of you for being here. This is the definition of community. To have this room packed like this is, I can't tell you how much it means to me and to the board and to the staff. So thank you all for being here and everything that you do for our community. The Talmud states that tzedakah is equal to all the other commandments combined. Thanks to your commitment to the community and understanding of the need to give back, I'm pleased to announce the campaign has raised to date $1,307,059 from 787 donors. Last year, we were able to invest over $5.8 million in the community from our Alliance annual campaign and endowment funds. Together, that's it, together, we are making an impact on the community. When we join together, we're able to change lives, grow the community, inspire our youth, and help those in need. And your generosity makes it possible to protect and enhance the well-being of people in our community here and worldwide. But it's not only your financial support, but also because of the many community volunteers that invest their time and energy in the Alliance and the agencies and programs supported by the annual campaign, that we can do the special work that we need to do for our community. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator and speaker, Alan Rosenberg. Get to talk about you for a couple minutes, Alan, while you have a seat. Alan is our moderator for this evening's program. He's been a reporter and editor at the Providence Journal for 41 years, currently serving as the paper's executive editor and editor of the ProvidenceJournal.com. Prior to his current role at the paper, he served as Providence police reporter and Providence City Hall reporter, as well as running suburban offices in the West Bay and South County, editing the Journal's Sunday magazine and its Life Beat, Arts, Weekend, and Sunday brunch sections. Well, what some of you may not know is that Alan taught at Temple Beth El's religious school for 19 years, specializing in the Holocaust and American Jewish history, winning the Goldberg Award for Teacher Creativity and the Jenny Klein Award as Teacher of the Year. His family is also honored by Jewish Family Service as Rhode Island Jewish Family of the Year. Alan, thank you for serving as moderator tonight. And now it's also my honor to introduce our guest speaker, Ari Melber. Ari is an Emmy Award-winning journalist, writer, and attorney. He's the chief legal correspondent for MSNBC and NBC News, an analyst covering the Justice Department and the Supreme Court, FBI, and other prominent court cases and legal issues. He appears regularly on The Today Show, NBC Nightly News, and other shows. After college, he worked in the U.S. Senate and for Senator John Kerry's presidential campaign. Following this, he attended law school and spent 4 years practicing First Amendment law, as well as writing articles for journals such as The Nation and Politico. Host of The Beat with Ari Melber on MSNBC, which is the best-rated show that MSNBC has, as well as one of the most viewed shows online. We welcome Ari Melber to Providence.
Is your mic on?
You tell me.
All right, on the bottom, let's try that.
You want to give it a go? You can start.
All right, I think we're going now.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here with you all.
So let's dive into some talk about the news. Not that there's been much news lately. Things are really quiet in Washington. And it really doesn't seem to stop. And I know that you every night you break down the latest, and often lately it's the latest about impeachment. So this week we reached a key moment, several key moments, but the moment when the process came out onto the floor of the House, and a vote was taken, a vote that had been demanded by the Republican Party. The Democrats gave them their public vote. They didn't seem too satisfied with it, however. So is the process, do you think, fair and open, and I think the Democrats say fairer than the process was for Clinton and Nixon? Or, as the Republicans say, is the process not only unfair right now, even now, but fatally flawed by its roots with the poisonous tree?
Well, as you say, this was a big week, even in a period of time where we have a lot of big weeks, because you have something that's really only happened a handful of times in all of American history, which is the Congress voting to go forward to create a process to impeach the sitting president. And as many of you know, and it's such a full house, so give yourselves a hand for showing up on a Sunday night, and we'll keep our commitment to the game, of course, as well, to watch out. But as I look around on so many studious faces, I think many people remember you had the Clinton case, where it went all the way to articles of impeachment and then the Senate acquittal. You have Nixon, where the process began and was what ousted him from office. And then you have President Johnson. So this almost never happens. That alone is significant. And I think it reflects the view of the newly elected Congress that this president is a unique danger and is currently, they say, trying to take actions that would make the next election unfair, in a Watergate sense, to try to impact or steal the next election. You're asking about the impeachment process, and that's something we try to do on the beat and our coverage across MSNBC, is give people the facts. So I'm not here to tell you tonight whether it's fair or not. You all can decide what you think. But I've read the resolution, and I've compared it to the past resolutions, and we've done all that homework, and it is true that the Democrats have now authorized a process that affords more procedural protections to this president than have happened in past impeachments. So, for example, the right to object to evidence and question witnesses by the president's lawyers if they choose to engage the House process. So that's more. Is that fair? You all can decide. They're also doing something that I think is fundamentally different than the Clinton and Nixon examples, which is, remember, there's no special prosecutor for the Ukraine bribery plot. There's no federal prosecutor breathing down the neck of the president on that issue. Everyone remembers the Mueller probe. But a fundamental difference here to those impeachments is the Intelligence Committee is basically doing it themselves really quickly, like in a couple weeks. And so they've moved very quickly in a private setting to gather these facts. Now they're turning to a public process, which, if you think about the Clinton and Nixon examples, we recall as them holding these hearings and getting big star witnesses, but those witnesses had already gone through a criminal investigative process that in both cases lasted years. So in some cases, the precedent is just fundamentally different than that, and you can only make up for that to a certain degree.
So is the Republican argument about the fruits of the poisonous tree, is that a political argument or is that a sound legal argument? You're a lawyer. I don't know if everybody knows that Ari is not only a lawyer, but was on the staff of Floyd Abrams, who's one of the leading constitutional lawyers in the country.
But I'm not just a lawyer, I also play a lawyer on television.
So the fruits of the poisonous tree, tell us what that means and whether you think it applies here.
Well, there is a doctrine in criminal law that has to do with procedural fairness. So if the cops come in and they have no reason to search you, but they say, yeah, you know what? He's Jewish, I don't like Jews, I'm going to search you. Bad reason, unlawful reason. Then what? They find something illegal on you. I don't know how detailed you want me to get in the hypothetical. Right now. You're trying to spot me.
Let's keep it,
Let's say they find an overdue parking ticket. Yeah, nothing too much. There's a question in the law of what do you do about that? As everyone knows in other contexts, it's very hard to turn around and prosecute police officers. And depending on the offense, the law has generally said that an illegal search, which is to say that search was unlawful, it violated your right, in this case the Fourth Amendment right, it doesn't mean the cop goes off to jail, but they need some room to make mistakes. Okay, that's reasonable. The fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine is the idea that they can make that mistake, but anything they find, a parking ticket, or in your case, a crack pipe, let's be honest, cannot be used against you in court. That's that doctrine. And there is a feeling of fairness about that it doesn't overdo it against the cop, although there could be other proceedings. But it doesn't automatically indict the cop, and it doesn't automatically do anything other than protect you and say we can't use that evidence against you. So in the political context, there's an argument that if you think some of this is unfair to the president or whomever, then you shouldn't be able to use it all against him. I would say in the constitutional moment that we're living in, that's a purely political argument. It's not legal. And this goes back to, remember during the Mueller probe when everyone said, well, wait a minute, what if they find Russian collusion? And Mueller ultimately didn't say that he found that to a provable degree, but what if they did? Were they going to charge the president? And everyone sort of remembered, oh no, we don't act like Nixon was in charge in office, and he was a full-blown crook. And he had to get pardoned on his way out, according to Ford. Why? Because he was worried about being charged after he left office. But we do know that typically, it's not in the Constitution, but the typical understanding in justice departments in both parties has been, you don't charge the sitting president, right? So the whole conversation here is about what do you do treating the president like a defendant, but only in the constitutional dimension that he could be impeached, which is like being charged, and convicted in the Senate, which is like being convicted and removed. And in that whole context, that's not really about criminal law. That's really about what the Congress, the House and Senate decide.
So let's stick with the Jews for a moment.
Well, and also, at some point, I hope we can answer the question tonight. Impeachment, is it good for the Jews?
Well, I'm sort of going to go there right now.
You're going to go there right now. I was joking, but I'll take any question now.
So we have Adam Schiff, who is derided by the president as Shifty Schiff. We have Colonel Vindman. There are Jewish people at the center of the impeachment inquiry. And does this invite, and has it invited, anti-Semitic tropes, anti-Semitic feelings that could really harm the Jewish community?
Well, I had a guest on my show this week, a guy named Mark Thompson, who's an African-American progressive radio host. And I was interviewing him about aspects of the probe, and he brought up sort of proactively his view that the Trump administration was already repeating anti-Semitic tropes to discredit certain witnesses. I think that when you're looking at an administration that, to not say all Trump supporters or all people involved, or even always knowingly, but an administration that has repeatedly trafficked in divisive bigotry. And so one day it's against Judge Curiel, who's a sitting federal judge, who was accused of being unable, I should say, to be a fair judge because of his race. And then you, with Vindman and others, you've had other sort of tropes pushed. So I think that's always something to monitor. And in our case, in journalism, we try to deal with it without letting it overtake the importance of Colonel Vindman, who you mentioned, who is this immigrant who served in the army, who served in Iraq, who has now come forward in the Ukraine investigation and said he was uncomfortable and concerned about this, and he thought it was a bribe the president was seeking to effect re-election. So you want to lead with that stuff, and then yes, if people are throwing that other garbage at him, we cover that too.
So today we see the whistleblower apparently is now willing to be questioned by the Republicans. This thing is moving so fast. It's hard to keep up with all the things that are coming out that one day are seem incredible and the president calls them fake news, and the next day they're part of an impeachment inquiry. Where do you see this going and how quickly?
Well, this is where I think the news, because as you mentioned, I've worked a couple different jobs, and the news keeps you really on your toes and really intellectually humble, because you just can't get ahead of what's going to happen because there's so many variables, and you learn that quickly or you learn it the hard way. So I'm curious, by a show of hands, if we're being honest, 6 months ago, by a show of hands, how many people thought the president was definitely going to be impeached? Okay. And today, by a show of hands, how many people think the president's definitely going to be impeached? Yeah. And you're all presumably informed. I mean, you are Jewish. And I agree with you. It looks way more likely now, given this vote. It's very hard to reverse a House vote of this nature where we're headed. And it didn't look as likely 6 months ago. And we're talking about a really big call that we've all followed, I think, pretty closely. When you get to the calls that are about things that you haven't followed as closely or are newer or take more expertise, right? We know even less. So part of the answer is to really focus on what is the information or the material, the evidence that we can put before the audience on any given night that is the most relevant and that has the least spin on the ball. In other words, one of the least interesting things you can get from your news anchor that night is their opinion of what happened. If something happened really extraordinary and you're really curious, sometimes it comes up. But that's really very little value add. But if we can really do our homework all day and focus on, well, here's what's new, and here's what we've learned, and here's what's changed. And there was a period of time, right at the beginning of the Ukraine story, when it wasn't as clear maybe how much evidence there was or how big a scandal was going to be, but we started tracking each night the number of Democrats who had previously been against impeachment, meaning everything you know about Donald Trump, and you know they're in the Democratic Party, which tells you they don't love him to begin with, and they're still against impeachment. And we were tracking day by day after Ukraine. Oh, one more today, 2 more on Tuesday, 1 more on Wednesday, 4 more on Thursday. And we didn't know where the stories were going. We said, they're closer to it than we are. Some of them are on the Intelligence Committee. Something's happening here. And so that is way more significant than if the news anchor comes on and says, well, I thought he should have been impeached 2 weeks ago, and tonight, I think that still. And you're like, cool, okay, yeah, but so what? So that's one aspect, is you try to stay mentally open-minded about what is the evidence that's moving this, and still open to, we don't know what's going to happen.
So impeachment is the easy part, right? Because you've got a Democratic majority in the House. They've already voted to open the inquiry. It would be hard to imagine the ones who voted to open the inquiry, maybe a few of them, but by and large, they're pretty likely to vote to impeach. But an impeachment is just an indictment. It's only half, it's really less than half of what you need to remove a president from office, because then you've got to get the Senate, and in the Senate it's not a simple majority. The Senate needs to be 2/3, and you don't even have a majority of Democrats, let alone 2/3. So what do you think it would take to convince enough Republicans, as well as, say, Joe Manchin, who has his own calculations, to go along and for the president to actually be convicted, which has never happened in the history of this republic?
I mean, the short answer is I don't know. See my answer above. But to engage your question seriously, I mean, one of the reasons this is such a significant time is we're now getting to the level of problems, as agreed to at least by the elected representatives, that we're looking at constitutional remedies. And as you say, one of them is what the impeachment as an indictment does, and what does the trial do, and what does the trial lead to? Can it ever lead to a potential conviction and removal? And, there are many, many reasons that many people really revile Donald Trump. Is that a fair statement? Yeah. There are very few reasons to remove Donald Trump from office under the Constitution, and that's how the framers intended it. It was not supposed to be a way to redo or double check a political choice or a policy choice in the election. It was not supposed to be a chance to say, well, we really, really don't like that guy or gal, whoever might be president. It's something higher, and it is written down as treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And treason, if you think about it, it's almost like implied. I mean, that's the thing, that if you completely oppose and abdicate the office, then of course you shouldn't have the office. Bribery, leave it to Donald Trump to admit to doing the thing that is listed. Because high crimes you can still have a debate about. Bribery is literally the other thing. So treason is, you can't betray your office for foreign power. And in the criminal context, treason is actually defined as any country that you actually have an open conflict, war with. In the constitutional context, they meant anyone. I mean, if Donald Trump started just shipping all the nukes and money to Canada just to be treasonous for Canada, eventually, right, that could be treason. Bribery, right, is abusing the office and saying, instead of going to carry out the office for the country, I'm going to carry it out for my own interests. So you got to give me something. Well, if you're rich, or even like him, like semi-rich, but he's not broke. Money is not the bribe you're interested in, right? Even for him. The bribe he was interested in, which we only know because he said so, is helping him win re-election, which also helps address the other thing I mentioned, which is not being chargeable when you're out of office and a whole bunch of other stuff. And he literally says, do us a favor, do these things that I want to help me win re-election. Now then he has at times denied that, so in fairness, we'll report his denials as well. But then his number one person, not like a random spokesperson or someone out of the loop, but the chief of staff comes out and says, no, yeah, it was a quid pro quo bribe. We do that all the time. Get over it. Right? And it sounds ridiculous, but it's literally, I'm just telling the story. Now, can you have a situation where the Senate says, we see all those facts, and either we deny them, we don't address them, or we see them, but we don't think they're impeachable, removable. So yes, it was a little bribe, or looked like a bribe, but we just aren't going to convict on it. Absolutely. And the Constitution affords them that power. And so, as a long-winded answer, which doesn't even really answer your question, seeking a prediction, I mean, is that not a lawyer move? I will respectfully decline to try to make a prediction, but my answer is the Senate trial is what ultimately will lay this out. And you'll notice there are many Republican senators who attack everything about this except ever saying, well, it's okay to go get a foreign bribe to win the election. They don't actually say that. And if you think that Mick Mulvaney is a genius, you think he's trying to create more rhetorical space so that eventually that sounds less crazy than it might. Or if you think he just messed up, he gave a preview to all the Senate Republicans about what it looks like when you come out there and go, we do that all the time. And even as a current employee of Trump, you can't sit on it. They were walking that back within hours. And there's a little bit of a backstory in the news. He said it, we were getting ready to cover it. A couple of hours go by, it looked like a huge gaffe. They didn't say anything. And then the president's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, put out a statement around 3 hours after that said, that statement doesn't reflect advice of counsel or the president's position. And the president's lawyer only says that in public after he's called Mick Mulvaney and tried to talk him off, and they still couldn't talk him off. A couple hours later, as I'm sure you know, then they retract it. So I think the Senate trial, if there is one, will be a place to then put it all out there and see which Republicans want to sign onto that or vote a different way or come up with another reason why, as we heard in the Clinton case, many people of the president's party said, a bunch of this is terrible, but I don't think we should remove the president for it. But we're not there right now.
So rather than a prognosticator's hat, let me ask you to put on your analyst's hat. Suppose, as seems now perhaps most likely, although, as you say, we really don't know what's going to come out, but suppose the president is impeached, but the Senate does not convict. Politically, do you think that ends up harming Donald Trump in next year's election, or do you think it ends up helping him, that he can say, look, there was a political indictment, but then the Senate, it vindicated me, I've been vindicated, vote for me?
Yeah, I think it's a great question a lot of people are thinking about. You want the constitutional impeachment power to be used above and apart from politics. But it is being exercised by the two houses of Congress, which are the most political branches. They're not the judiciary. They're not the agencies. And so, yes, there's going to be some discussion of that and analysis. I don't know, but the way I look at it, it is right at the intersection of law and politics, which is sort of supposed to be my thing or whatever. And when I look at it, what I see is, I really think there's basically two lanes. One is, what are the allegations, right? And the other is just, okay, does this show people something about you? And so in the Clinton case, the allegations were, and it's always difficult to summarize, but they were widely agreed to be negative and distasteful. And Democrats, I mean, if you think back, the Democratic Party was so critical of Bill Clinton's underlying conduct that in the next election, it picked the chief Democratic critic from the Senate, who was Jewish, Joe Lieberman, right? To be the running mate, right? First time you ever had a Jew on the national ticket, and Joe Lieberman said what he said was his morals guided him to criticize Bill Clinton, but he didn't vote to remove Bill Clinton. So the idea that there's no space in American life for some nuance, I mean, I think people do have that. But in the Clinton case, the allegations fundamentally were not seen widely as abuse of the actual powers of the presidency to the impeachable, removable degree. Here, I really do think that you either find a defense like, well, you don't think he did it, or you don't think he meant it, or he just talks on phone calls. There are things you can say, but you're definitely talking about abuse of office. So the lane one of the allegations, to me, is obviously more serious. And the lane two is, what does it reveal about him? And, he won very narrowly. If what it reveals about him to all the people out in the country who were told he's going to use that tough guy jerk thing on your behalf, that's the argument. If 1 out of 100 or 2 out of 100 think, doesn't seem like he's doing it on my behalf, he's not being a tough guy and bullying or pushing or pressuring people to get me a job, he's doing it to get himself a job again, well, then the politics of that don't help him, because the resistance is not going to move towards Donald Trump over the next year. That's just not where it's at. And the midterms are the highest voter turnout in 80 years since women got the right to vote in this country. So there's an incredible civic uprising, and the question is, do 1 out of 100 or 2 out of 100 people watch this process and think, oh, he's not in it for me? That's, I think, the key question.
So you've talked tonight about the importance of a news person looking at the evidence, keeping an open mind, and obviously I agree with you. You come to your job from both a constitutional law background, but also a political background. You were an aide to a Democratic senator. You caucused for John Kerry in 2004. I read that you wept when he lost.
It's really getting into it. I mean, they were tears of exhaustion. It wasn't emotional.
Okay. So, coming from a background where you were, I would say, a committed member of the Democratic Party.
Sure.
How do you then take a step back and become a newsman who is going to be fair to both sides? How do you change that mindset?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, and I would say it goes beyond politics. When I practiced law, I had to put my client first no matter what. That's a role. And attorneys take that very seriously. And I'm sure there are people here who have those kind of jobs, whether it's law or if you're a doctor. You're really thinking about the well-being of your patient. And if something else comes up, whatever it might be, it doesn't trump that role. And then you go on and we live our full lives and you have other ideas and thoughts. So, if anything, the legal training, being in politics helped me understand, I think, a little more about how that stuff works behind the scenes and what people don't say in public, and use that, hopefully, in my job today. But if anything, I would point more to the legal training, which is you figure out what it means to really advocate for something, and what the lawyers call zealous advocacy. There's still rules to it. There's still factual requirements for anything you file in court. But you're really putting the best, strongest, most zealous case you can in one direction. And that doesn't mean that it melts down your brain's ability to see the whole case. If anything, I think it sharpens it. And so I think about applying that when I do my work now, which is, okay, what's the real evidence and the facts here that I want to present? And to the extent that something is an opinion or outside of that, let's mark it. Whether that comes up from our own understanding, our own views, or our guests' views, let's mark it and then let the audience run with it, because the audience ultimately can distinguish that. And I'll give you one more example, because there's one idea of you should have no opinion. So if you ever had an opinion or worked anywhere or were ever involved in a cause, well, then how can you be an objective journalist? I think that's a little silly, because on the biggest things, everyone's going to have an opinion. So take ISIS. You can't find a lot of American journalists who are neutral about ISIS, right? They kill Americans, they kill journalists, and they kill Jews, right? So if you're going to really claim, well, I'm totally neutral on that. No, you have a view. But if you're covering a battle and they're winning that battle, or they've claimed more territory, you have to figure out how to tell the audience, separate from the fact that you might not even like that they claim the territory, the facts. So I think if you're pretty straightforward with your viewers, you can do that on any story.
It's noteworthy, I think, that leading Republicans do come on your show. Jay Sekulow has been on your show a number of times.
Jay Sekulow, Corey Lewandowski, Steve Bannon, I'm sure some of you love him. Sebastian Gorka. We had more witnesses from the Mueller probe on the show than any other news show on any channel, including Michael Caputo from the Trump campaign, Sam Nunberg, if you remember him, Jerome Corsi, who was a total racist, which I said to him on air. Carter Page, remember him? Yeah. So I think it's important that I try to make sure those people can come on. That doesn't mean they get away with anything and there aren't rules, but I work very hard on that.
And they're not always, as you say, they're not always just pleasant chats. Jay Sekulow was pretty upset a month or so ago when he said that there was no proof of something. You immediately put up on a slide behind him. There's the quote. There it is. What are you thinking during a confrontation like that?
I mean, that's an interesting question. So, how many people by show of hands have ever seen Jay Sekulow on the beat? Just so I know how much to explain. So, it's a good number. When Jay comes on, he's there not as a kind of an expert, like, he's there as an advocate for Donald Trump. So we try to prepare to figure out, well, what's going to be a good use of the time to go through these issues. And and he knows this, so I'm not giving away a total trade secret, but I will look at what he's been saying recently in his other interviews and figure out, okay, that's already out there. So how can we test this? He was, in that interview, putting forward this argument that, well, no matter what you think of the Ukraine plot, none of it actually violates a federal statute. Therefore, it's not that big a deal or impeachable, end of story. Now, there's two ways you can address that. Number one, the Constitution provides, as I mentioned earlier tonight, reasons to impeach, and they're not based on federal statutes. Indeed, when they passed the Constitution, they hadn't passed that many federal statutes, right? But that's kind of, then you're down. I mean, first of all, like, some of you have probably tuned out just in this section of me saying that. I would. But it's also, like, not the point, the bigger point. Because what he's really saying is, how bad can it be if it's mostly legal? And that's a way of arguing something. And so we prepared and put up, knowing he was going there, that statute. And so that back and forth, to me, is hopefully more useful than him yelling something, me yelling back, but there's no other evidence there. And it also means that if I give him his time, I can, and we think a lot about this, present to the audience the visual fact check. I also have Joe Arpaio on the show. Any big Arpaio fans out here? People say, well, how can you have him on? Well, I had Joe Arpaio's first interview after he got a pardon from President Trump, which was the first pardon of the Trump administration. To me, that's a newsworthy interview. But I said to him, well, so you understand, by accepting the pardon, you're accepting the guilt of the offense, and before this, you were fighting the offense. And he said, well, I don't know about that. That's not how I look at it. And I said, well, respectfully, sir, it doesn't matter how you look at it. That's what it means. And we had up on the screen the Supreme Court precedent, which says under law in this country, the acceptance of a pardon is the acceptance of the guilt for the underlying offense. And so we had that exchange, and we left it up. So when he's given time to rebut, because he should have some fair time, the audience can understand that while he may say something, he may be a sheriff, I would say he ought to know the law a little better, but that's just me. That's what you would call an opinion, right? But the audience can see, okay, Ari asked him a question, okay, Ari followed up with a fact check, okay, he's still saying his thing, but the legal fact is on the screen.
You raised something that really has come out during the last 3 years, which I never saw before that, which is news organizations like the Associated Press, in a story where they quote the President of the United States, going on to say, which he said without proof, or which he said although it's not true. I'm not going to say whether other presidents lied or didn't lie, but it's so noteworthy that the press as a whole, different organs of the press, find it necessary to fact-check the president in the middle of a news story. Do you think that this is something that you doing it, so you must think it's good. Do you think that this makes some readers think, or some viewers think, well, look, he obviously is opposed to this person because he's essentially calling him a liar?
I think Donald Trump has moved the line on this, and so most politicians lie a certain amount, but Washington Post and others have documented it's more and more frequent than any politician in the history of the world.
More than 13,000 since Inauguration Day.
So then I think that puts the press in the position of having to figure out how much that is the actual headline or the lead of the story. When I was studying Donald Trump during the campaign, how many people have read The Art of the Deal? I mean, it's quite a book to understand where we're at. You think how many articles and other things you read. I think because it was back in '87, he co-authored it with Tony Schwartz, who's since become a critic of his and who we sometimes have on my show. But The Art of the Deal lays it out. It's so completely cynically amoral, more so than the typical politician or business person or others that you expect to be aggressive. And there's a passage in The Art of the Deal where he says he figured out early on that if he made a small lie, it didn't get that much attention. But an outrageous lie was free advertising. And he gives the example of having a new building and saying, the new building is the tallest building in the world. And he said they print it once in the article, and sometimes at the end they say, well, that's not true. And then if it's an outrageous lie, they'll print a follow-up piece that they call, he says in the book, he says they call it a fact check. But all it is a second article that has pictures of my building next to the Sears Tower and other buildings, and it just puts my building in the company with these other tall buildings, and the average person walks away and they've heard more about my building, and they've heard about it being like other really tall buildings, so they figure it's got to be somewhat similar. And this is a type of manipulative insight he has that other people in business, even if they could make more money that way, wouldn't necessarily want to. They would think about their reputation, whatever. So that's who we're dealing with. And so you have to be, I think, much more assertive in that framing. Otherwise, you will keep beating the video game. I don't know whether the standard will shift a little bit if the people in power shift.
So let's return to the Jews again. It's a good topic.
I don't see why not.
It's a good topic. You are the son of an Israeli.
Yes.
And the grandson of Holocaust survivors.
Yes.
Tell us something about your Jewish journey.
Well, it's interesting because I think that for me, I grew up in a very proud Jewish home. I went to a Jewish day school, shout out to Jewish day schools, and shout out to the Jewish Alliance, because I was listening to all the accomplishments before coming up on the stage, and it's fantastic. You should all be very proud of yourselves for the community. So for me, it was a very proud Jewish upbringing, and my father being Israeli also meant that he really wanted us to be very American in our daily life. So we didn't grow up speaking Hebrew. We went to a Jewish day school to be Jewish, but he really wanted us as the type of immigrant he felt, is he just wanted us to be here and be all in. So for me, that was a really positive environment, and I can't say that I gave it a ton more thought than that. And I think going on to a public high school and being in other diverse environments that made me appreciate it extra. And I've always thought about it in terms of any diaspora community makes you acutely aware of what it is to be the minority or the outsider. And the minority doesn't necessarily mean automatically negative or marginalized, although it can involve that. But it certainly makes you aware of that. So if anything, as a proud Jewish American, I felt good about all that. But I think it also helped me really potentially, or I should say hopefully, identify with other people in certain situations where you might be the minority, or people see only your identity first, and sort of feeling like, oh, okay, your situation is different than mine, but I kind of get that. And so those are the ways that it was important to me. But I didn't feel, you think about the riot, the way anti-Semitism ebbs and flows throughout history and geography and things we're dealing with now. I can't say that my personal experience was feeling a lot of that at a young age. And so for me, that was something that was more learning about it and then learning about it intellectually, versus you could be in a community today and have the hate crimes and the other things and feel it a whole different way.
Have you encountered anti-Semitism in your professional life now? I know a lot of national Jewish journalists have reported getting all kinds of hateful social media posts and emails and that sort of thing.
Not in person, a little bit in online, a little bit, but not a lot.
Another thing that distinguishes you and your show, really, from other shows on the air is that you inject hip-hop into the news. I don't think that Walter Cronkite ever did that.
Not that we know of.
Not that we know of. There may be a tape out there somewhere.
Lost mixtapes. Anyone could find one.
So, how did you come to decide to do that?
I don't know that there's a great answer to that, but as a guest, when you come in as a guest, it actually breaks down to a pretty straightforward thing where you're going to speak 2 or 3 times in a segment, and that's it. And so it wasn't that I was thinking explicitly about hip-hop, and by the way, it's a lot of hip-hop, but it's other music references as well, but the hip-hop ones tend to stand out and get more noticed, I would agree. And so I remember doing interviews and thinking, okay, the first answer is what you think or some fact that you bring, and then the second, and by the second or third, almost a little bit to entertain myself. But what's more entertaining is something that you're genuinely interested in. So it's not like you're doing it because you think somebody else wants it. You're just doing it. Was adding it in. And so, for example, I remember like one of the early times I remember doing it on like a big show. You're like, it's also a TV. Like, TV's exciting. You get a little adrenaline when you go out there. But once you do it a few times, you realize like if you're doing a really random show at a really random hour or some, Sunday at 6 a.m. before the big, there may not be that many people watching. This was like I was on with Lawrence O'Donnell in the campaign re-election, so it was 2012 for Obama's re-election, and a lot of people watching. And Mitt Romney was in this weird fight with Erskine Bowles. Remember how politics used to be like way more just whatever, like where Romney said that his tax plan was basically similar to Erskine Bowles' budget, which was a draft budget that had never actually been passed, but that he wrote as a recommendation to the Democrats, Erskine Bowles being Clinton's former chief of staff. Shout out to Erskine Bowles. How many people remember him? All right. And so the whole thing was so convoluted and I thought kind of boring. They were like, we might get into how Romney's saying the reference to the budget of Erskine Bowles isn't an accurate. I was like, all right, like I'm bored by this and I'm into politics. So to summarize it, because it was all whatever, I remember saying, well, basically, Erskine Bowles had pushed back and said, our plan's not the same. I said, basically, what's really going on here is Erskine Bowles is putting Mitt Romney in his place. And to paraphrase 3-6 Mafia, he's saying, keep my name out your mouth. And it was just a way to say it and whatever. And then it was like, that worked. Or people thought that was better than the whole Bowles story, which I told you in a deliberately boring way. Just so you know. And it kind of went on from there. And the only thing that's different than just quoting it, and for those of you, I'm sure some people here watch CNN or Fox or watch sports and not the news, but you're here because I'm Jewish, and that's cool. But if you haven't seen the beat, one part is using lyrics and other things, movies and other things to help understand our world. The other part that changed really only in the last 2 years, because the show's just over 2 years old, was doing that in a way that was just real and authentic, drew feedback from artists, who then said they were more willing to come on the show, and we were happy to invite them because we think that life is variety, why shouldn't the news? So that's the other thing that's changed, where Method Man sent me a message out of the blue from Wu-Tang after I quoted him or something, and like me who was like in high school listening to Wu-Tang, that was like the craziest thing that ever happened to me. And then we said like, well, you want to come on the show sometime? And he said, for you, yeah. And you're like, okay, so that's really exciting to us too.
So one of the early profiles of you, when you were doing your previous show, The Cycle.
This guy really does his homework, huh? He knows when I cry, early profiles.
Got to do your homework.
When's the last time I cried? Do you have that?
Your
Or just
wife wouldn't tell me.
You only know about my political tears.
That's right.
And there's nothing wrong with crying, by the way, just to be clear.
Described you as a policy. So you were described as a policy wonk, and then in sort of a backhanded compliment, not just another pretty face. So you do have a pretty face, and I shouldn't put him, right?
Thank you very much. That's really sweet. Do you want me to compliment you now?
TV reporters often feel, I think, dismissed by being judged on their looks. Do you ever find that you're not taken seriously because you're a good-looking guy?
I'll tell you this, I do a lot of interviews. Some of these questions are questions I've never gotten before. Now, is that a compliment, or can you think about it? There are times where I feel like I'm not taken seriously because I'm not always serious, and I can be a little ridiculous, and that's okay. And so if somebody already thinks that I know what I'm talking about, then they probably are going to look at that benignly. But if they don't, and in this world we're constantly meeting people and reintroducing ourselves, right? Like, then I think they might be like, it's too goofy or whatever. That would be my main experience with that.
Well, let's talk about something really serious. We're going to move to questions from the...
Hey, these are your questions. All right.
Do you see this time we are going through in America as similar to the 1930s in Germany?
I'm not a historian. I always find on air, analogies are very difficult because an analogy involves comparing something that's similar and something that's different. If the two things were exactly the same, it wouldn't be an analogy, right? If I was like, this microphone is like a microphone. But as soon as you compare it to something, people think that you're comparing all of it. I will tell you this, in our reporting, we're very careful not to extend too far with historical and certainly serious and severe analogies like that one, because I think they, to use a cliche, they create more heat than light. But I will say that when we look big picture, it's obviously important to step out of just the political dimension because, Obama had this joke he used to do when he talked about when things are solely reduced to politics and electoral mechanisms, you lose the values. And I think that the core of the question is, well, wait a minute, are we concerned about what else is possible, what else is happening? And so he put up, I was at an event that he did in DC where they do jokes, the roast type events, and he put up imagine if there was today's media in the Civil War era, and it showed Lincoln frees slaves, dooms himself in the next midterms. that there's not even any separation, that it's automatic. So what I will say is I think it's very important, and we talked about it earlier, whether you talk about in the Constitution, or people walking into synagogues and shooting people up, and walking into black churches, and the rise in hate crimes, and these other things that when we look at how we do our jobs, when people say, oh, well, the president is appealing to his base with this whatever, and is that good politics? And we have to say, well, there's more than politics at play, particularly when you get into demagoguery, bigotry, acts that can be construed as encouraging violence, even if they may or may not mean to. So I think we take all that seriously, but I would probably avoid the analogy.
The reference by the president to the phony emoluments clause, I thought was striking, that here is the actual Constitution of the United States, and the president is calling it phony. And of course, he's suggested that he should be reelected to more than 2 terms. Do you think that he really has that kind of disregard for the Constitution, or does he just say whatever comes to his mind? What do you think's going on?
I think what's important is to make sure that everyone is civically educated about how that works. So we have a country where if a politician, whoever it may be, because I don't want the headline, Ari said Trump's going to do X. I don't know what he's going to do. But we have a country where if any politician says, I'm staying past the point of my election, that's irrelevant. That's just embarrassing for them because we're not that country. In the same way that when we were first covering some of the immigration policies, people would ask me, well, what happens if they limit the travel ban And he says, no. And I said, well, this is still America. What happens is, when the president issues a otherwise lawful order, the people in government carry it out. And when they get a court ruling to halt it, they halt it. And if the president says after that, no, keep going, everyone in the military knows this, and DHS knows this, and so far, everyone's been following it. They say no, and they stand by that. So whether the president, this or any president, thinks they can serve beyond whatever, then it's just nope, because the Secret Service on that anointed day and that date, Constitution is vague about a lot of things, but it's very specific about the peaceful transfer of power. And on that date, that person becomes the ex-office holder, and the Secret Service turn to protecting someone else, and it goes on from there. So I think as long as we're educated and diligent, we have a system that protects against that. Whether what's in his mind, does he really mean it or not, who the hell knows?
How do you and your colleagues respond to being called fake media, or that you are reporting false news by President Trump and his supporters? And how do you feel about these accusations?
Well, if anybody wants, you never have to. How many people here, by a show of hands, because you are a supporter of the president or because it's part of how you feel, use the term fake news like seriously or unironically? So those folks, they're not here tonight, but they're here in the nation. I'll give you a couple quick examples as answers. Number one, if you're reporting the news, you have to take every assertable fact, and we do this as a process, and fact check it. If it's not been previously confirmed or reported, you need two sources. If it involves certain types of accusations, it goes through a standards and sometimes legal. It's a meticulous process to put together enough facts and then try to tell the story in an interesting way, which is why a lot of times we do fake news, because making it up is faster.
He's not serious.
No, I'm not serious. Look, if you wanted to just make stuff up, obviously you could do that. The entire fight is between the people who have a track record and history of trying to get it right, which doesn't mean you always get it right. Part of being the news is always being ready to issue the correction and the update. That's a part of our actual identity and process, against people who aren't in the fact business, screaming that you're not factual. So with all due respect, some of that is, I just rebut it and move forward and do my job. I don't want to let it work the rest too much, because that's its purpose. Second, I do think we have an obligation as reporters to prove ourselves. We're living in a time where a lot of institutions have less automatic deference than they used to receive, and there are good reasons for that. So I don't want to conflate, that's why I asked who says fake news. I don't want to conflate fake news, which is a bad faith, politically BS tactic, with media and press criticism, which is an important part of the healthy public debate. So we have to be open to that, and the press, on the real side, has made a lot of publicly known mistakes, whether it was missing the housing crisis or being too credulous in Iraq war coverage, or in 2016 acting like national polls meant that everyone knew where we're going. You'll notice I try to avoid predictions, because the net result is either you happen to be right about something that you didn't know, so you were lucky, or you were wrong, but people might have given you credibility, so your prediction affected the outcome, which isn't the goal. So we have a lot of things to work on as an institution. The third thing I'll say is, I was out at covering some Trump events, and this was in the primaries before he become the nominee, let alone the president. So I'm standing out there, press badge, and a guy comes up who was going to the rally, appeared to be a Trump supporter, and he kind of gets up in my face and he says, "You're the press?" I said, "I'm a member of the press." And he said, "Well, I hope you tell the truth about what goes on inside there tonight." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, if I were going to lie about it, I wouldn't need to fly all the way to New Hampshire." And sometimes it's just logic, being there to show up and logically engage. And I don't know if I moved him or not, but you mentioned the folks we have on the show. My goal is not to be in a smug or petty or endless debate with one team or one side about the credibility of the press. My goal is to take serious criticism seriously, ignore what merits ignoring, and as Jerry Garcia would say, and keep on trucking. Now, is that deadheads applauding, or is that applause to the press, or is it both?
I think this audience is full of deadheads. Where do you get your panelists? How are they selected? Do they get paid?
So there's a system for that. So you can tell who's getting paid because they'll always be identified as an MSNBC contributor or an MSNBC analyst. So that's the minority of guests, but obviously it's good for transparency that you can tell, oh, this person is like a contractor or sort of works there, and this person doesn't. That's especially important if we hire people who were former prosecutors or former, CIA, because now they work in the government, now they're getting paid by a media company, and everyone has a right to know that. So that's how you know that. If that's not identified in their introduction on the screen, everyone else you're seeing are not getting paid. And I think to be an educated, media consumer, you can factor that in, because that means they're there either because they want to be on TV, they care about the cause of the subject, or they're pushing an agenda. A lot of my guests obviously are pushing an agenda. So in a way, it cuts both ways. If someone's getting paid, that factors in a certain way. If you're a real, media critic, like Noam Chomsky would say, well, anyone who starts getting paid is basically now they're a part of it, so they're going to go along more because they can only dissent so much. I think that's worth keeping in mind. I definitely don't want to do a show most nights where every guest is a paid member of NBC, even though NBC, I think, is an amazing institution to work for, but I want outside guests. So that's how you know that part. Where we get them, we give a lot of thought to trying to find people who know things and have firsthand experience. We also like people who are quick, concise, watchable, because it's television. But you'll notice on my show when we do law, we're generally leaning more towards people who've practiced law than reporters who write about law. No shade, but when possible, that's great. And so we look at experience a lot.
How do you win the disinformation war being waged by Fox News and Trump?
I, like any lawyer, I reject the premise because I'm not at war or even in competition with any given government, right? I'm covering the government. In this case, the government's obviously run by Donald Trump, and it's very controversial. But, they want that. And the more that they can get anyone thinking that way, even their critics, the more that they can position the facts, which ideally in a democracy are the baseline for our discussions, they can position the facts as just one more point along a political spectrum of whether you like or don't like something. And that's, I think, very dangerous. That's where, propaganda can really work and can really, corrupt a society. So I'm not at war with that, but I'm certainly conscious of how much we are going to react to things that are designed to get us in the press to react. So we have a policy on my team where we don't treat any tweet by Donald Trump as automatically news. And you'll see some shows where if it's a new tweet, or it just came across the line, and they at least report it quickly, or a lot, or if it's really controversial, more so. We have a strict policy on that, and that's to basically check ourselves from the habit of treating that as news to react to. If there is something that is significant that happens to come across the Twitter stream, like when the U.S. government announced a ban of people who identify as trans from the military, it was done for the first time through the tweet. Well, that news is the thing, the ban, and we'll cover that. And so the New York Times, actually, I was just noticing as a piece in the Sunday special today, all about Twitter presidency and all that. Part of that is a media play, and he's tweeting even more against impeachment to try to push back. So that's an example where, although we're not at war, we give great thought to having policies, right? And I will say with more credible entities, you don't do that as much. I also cover the Southern District of New York's prosecution office. I don't think they're always right. It's not my job to act like they're always right. But if they announce a press conference or release a statement, it always correlates to activity that they are doing in their authority as the prosecutor's office. And so over time, the press defers to that being true. And so I don't have a no press release standard with them because I don't have to, because they're not full of blank the way he sometimes is.
What about Fox News?
They're just one competitor among many. I mean, I think that we live in a balkanized media environment, so my competition is who else is on during my hour, as well as what you can get off your phone and your internet and everything else. So I think obsessing over what's on, on any particular channel, or because people think of them as more cross-purposes MSNBC, that's fine. Everyone can make up their mind, but I don't fixate on that. And when I'm in the chair, I'm not looking at video of any other TV channel. I'm doing the show.
Is there anything the citizens of the United States can do to counteract the inundation of the courts with right-wing judges up to the Supreme Court?
Well, again, I hate to be repetitive and boring. I don't think it's my job to give counsel on that at this point. But I think it's certainly true that, there's a lot of reduction of Donald Trump to what he leans into as his brand. His attitude, his disruptive style, his blatant and habitual attacks on almost every potential sacred cow that we have. That's quite deliberate. That's his thing. And so he has had a higher rate of judicial confirmations than the past two presidents. So everyone says, oh God, he doesn't know what he's doing, he's not organized, this and that. Well, somebody over there is organized about something. And the Supreme Court is still the axis of all jump balls in American politics, and on the right, it is still whether you want to be charitable and call it the reason, or you want to be more skeptical and call it the excuse. The Supreme Court is the reason or excuse that people go and vote for Republican candidates that they said they would never vote for. I mean, do the thought experiment. Donald Trump was basically a New York Democrat for a long time. Can you imagine if the Democratic Party ran Donald Trump and what the evangelicals would be saying about him? And yet they voted for him, and they're prepared to do it again. But if you want to, like I said, be charitable, they're saying, well, he's temporary, the bench is permanent. And they already got two justices, and they might have a third.
What happened to Senator Graham?
That's a good question. Lindsey Graham. I mean, so I'll answer this by way of how we think about things on our show. There's stuff that we do, and then you do it a few times, and then it's like, I love my dad, and he's wonderful and 75 and as sharp as he ever was. But he does and always has repeated the same stories. And I'm always like, I don't want to become my dad repeating the same stories. But on the news, sometimes we have tape that's so good. Like we have Lindsey Graham in 2015, which was not a long time ago. And they say, what do you think of Donald Trump? Have you guys seen this tape? Yeah, because some of you watched The Beat and we're playing it to death. But in terms of storytelling, it's incredible because he says, as Lindsey Graham, and Lindsey Graham's thing is acting like he's really, and politicians have different little tactics. His is like he's really going to just let it rip with you. He's telling you the truth now. And it turns out, because he's contradicted himself so many times, the only thing we know is he's not telling you the truth. And as I always say, he's entitled to think what he thinks. He just thinks what he thinks backwards throughout his whole career. That's for him to explain. But he leans in and he goes, well, I'll tell you, Donald Trump, he's a racist. He's a kook. He's not a serious person. He should get out of this race. It's like more sharp than most Republicans were even saying that. And now he's literally Donald Trump's #1 defender in the Senate. I spoke to some Republicans who didn't want to be identified, so it's what they call a background, about the Senate. And the view is, of course, a lot of them think they'll hold the line, but who knows, and how bad will it get? And one of them said it's all about Lindsey, and if he keeps defending him, there's that. But if he loses Lindsey, everything could shift. So Lindsey has become the chief defender of Donald Trump. And he's obviously doesn't believe what he's saying. Because when he wasn't under pressure and power and under a political mallet, he told us something, right? And now he's had to change it. All I can tell you about studying these individuals as people is, Lindsey Graham liked being relevant, has publicly said, it's not about winning a seat, and you're just one of 100. It's about being relevant. And so in the earlier era, that meant finding, he was leading with John McCain, to renegotiate the rules for Gitmo defendants, and he's a former judge advocate general, and he would say it's so important because he served as a military lawyer, how to do it, and as McCain got on in years and as the party turned to Trump, he clearly shifted, and this is the way he's being relevant now. And I think that just tells you a lot about where a lot of people are, because at the end of the day, it's not me criticizing him, it's Lindsey Graham saying in 2015, Donald Trump is one of the worst things you could be in public life, which is a racist. And that's why Lindsey Graham opposed him. And then you have Lindsey Graham today.
Why isn't there more investigative reporting on Attorney General William Barr? Why would he want to come out of retirement with his reputation then intact to ruin his name and go down in infamy? This is the greatest mystery of all to me, says this questioner.
You see a lot of people who, within the last few years, you wouldn't have expected that they would go take these jobs, and they do. And so if the question is, do I know the secret why they do? No, I don't know. Mr. Barr, more so than some other figures in the Trump administration, did have a solid reputation in conservative legal circles. He was right-wing, but right-wing and respected as a serious legal leader. And in a very short time, he has proven that to be completely shredded. I mean, he's totally shredded that. And I can give you some examples, and you probably know about some of them, but at a basic level, the president cited him as an agent of the Ukraine plot, and he hasn't recused from these investigations. And he should, which is not to say he did anything wrong. Jeff Sessions was the most conservative member of the U.S. Senate. He was the first senator to endorse Donald Trump. He was removed from his judgeship over complaints that he was racist and preferential to the KKK, and then he won a Senate seat. So wherever you think he is on the spectrum of ideology, there's ideology and then there's ethics, and they're not always running together. And when the ethics lawyers of the DOJ told Jeff Sessions, you have to recuse, you're too close to this probe, he said, okay. So whatever else you might think of Jeff Sessions, he did the thing you're supposed to do, and Barr isn't doing that, as well as a lot of other stuff. They rushed out an announcement as the Ukraine scandal broke, which the Congress thinks is literally the worst thing Trump has done in office. Barr rushed out an announcement that before they reviewed the evidence, there wasn't enough evidence to do a criminal probe, and they announced that in public. To say nothing of how he handled the Mueller probe. So all of that is who he is. Why? I mean, why do that when he already served as Attorney General and he had a strong reputation? I don't know.
How does the motive of profit for news and cable alter, in a positive or negative way, what kind of news we hear, how it is presented, and how the media are perceived? And is there a better alternative?
Well, most of the press is in the United States right now are for-profit companies. We live in a society where we expect for-profit companies to do a lot of other things that have high stakes or ethical considerations or medicine. But I think all the same conflicts come in, for sure. And I think they're probably more acute in television than in print, although both face those pressures. So I think that on the other hand, the alternatives aren't ideal either. I mean, we have a strong tradition against government-run press in this country. So what BBC or others do, I'm not sure at this point in our history that in the First Amendment that's going to work that well. And if you're a non-for-profit, then you are still fundraising and looking for money. It's just a different mechanism. So I don't have those solutions. I'm also not, thankfully, thank God I'm not a news executive, although I love them. Because of the thing I said about the profits, remember? So they're my bosses. But they're the ones who spend all day thinking about the business side of it, and I don't. I think what's interesting is a lot of our biggest conflicts right now are in the political and civic space, and I think the for-profit model is probably slightly less of an issue there. I think when our issues are in the corporate space, then there are more potential conflicts. So we did a big series last year, a 10-part series on Facebook, and it was quite critical of Facebook. And we looked at their role in affecting democracy, voting rights, election meddling. So it's quite critical. But Facebook, as a corporation, is very powerful, and they're a giant media company. And so we didn't care one way or the other. I don't think it affected us. But I do think it's a fair observation that if your stories are about corporate malfeasance, then you have more of a potential conflict to figure out if every night you're hearing those stories, right? But this is another good example. Somebody knows about the ads, and that's great. Because I'm in the chair, I don't see the ads while they run. So that's not to say that willful ignorance will take you so far. Somebody there does. I'm not saying there's no potential corporate impact. But I literally, and my staff, we literally don't keep track or look at who the advertisers are. And also, thankfully, as I understand it, they buy in typically large buckets, not per show. But just to play out the example, yeah, Facebook was going to be an advertiser sooner or later, right? How many stories are you going to do? I think those are questions that everyone should care about. But I don't think we're going to move away from a for-profit media.
Ari, this person knows you well. How can journalists demand more of the president when asking him questions when he is clearly prevaricating?
Well, this is that thing where, do you want to have your a few good men moment, where you pound on the table and then the person confesses, and then what happens when you do get that moment? I mean, Lester Holt, who's a very even style interviewer, he's not NBC Nightly News anchor, he's not that excitable, and he got Trump to admit, yes, I fired Comey over the Russia probe, which is why then you had a special counsel appointed, even in the Trump era, even by Trump appointees. So I do think what you get out of the president, it matters, but it may not be the fireworks you imagine. In other words, sometimes what people want is they want folks to scream at him and then him to get excited back. And that, again, I point to the Holt interview as actually one of the most significant. The Mick Mulvaney press conference was also interesting in the sense that the questioning was quite careful, but nobody was yelling or baiting him. They were really walking through it, almost like he didn't realize. They were like, so wait, but that would be a quid pro quo. They didn't scream it, they didn't say that was the worst thing ever. I think they did a good job. And then he goes, yeah, we do it all the time. So you can get that some of the time. The larger challenge is there's no rule or law, and I don't think there should be. You have to be available to press or hold press briefings. So most presidents of both parties held them. They canceled them. They haven't had a regularly scheduled White House press briefing in months. So they basically just closed down that press briefing room. Every so often officials come out, but not like a daily briefing like there used to be. And the president does almost no adversarial interviews with independent outlets. He speaks to the Times, the New York Times a little bit. He hasn't done a mainstream TV interview in over a year. So I think if and when he does it, we'll all do our best. But they've clearly opted towards trying to do a one-way model and trying to, when he stands out in front and you see him with the chopper and all that he's doing that because he's savvy and it gives him leverage because there aren't going to be follow-ups. He can pretend he didn't hear him and he walks off. I think ultimately we need a civil society and we need voters in both parties to expect presidents in both parties, no matter what, to face those questions. But we can't make him show up.
I've been given a signal that this is going to be our last question. Do you believe that Amy Klobuchar or a moderate Democrat, perhaps Mayor Pete, can win the Democratic nomination?
I think anyone can win the Democratic nomination who, gets the most delegates. I mean, last time I checked, it wasn't harder to be moderate in the Democratic Party than it was to be the first black candidate to ever become president. So I don't think there's a great number of ceilings left. I don't mean that to diminish that it's harder and there are double standards. But the way the question was phrased is, can? Yeah, sure, they can. I think what's striking, if we haven't talked a lot about the Democratic side, is the Democratic side of this equation has a bunch of systemic benefits. The opposition to Donald Trump has been higher than the support for Donald Trump since the election because of the narrow electoral college victory. And the midterms showed what happens when that majority is distributed throughout all 50 states. You need Wisconsin. Can't do like just certain states. So there's all of this structural enthusiasm that we see. And then there's the personality side, which is how do you deal with a problem like Donald Trump? And my observation in covering it is a lot of the Democrats are struggling to figure that out. Joe Biden hasn't done an MSNBC interview since he, in person. He did a phone interview, I believe, but he hasn't done an MSNBC interview in primetime since he announced. Is he hiding? What's going on there? I mean, he hasn't. Every candidate, for example, went on with Rachel. He hasn't. Elizabeth Warren is doing a grassroots campaign that looks to be very strong. And the question is can she be as excitable and strong as Donald Trump? Pete Buttigieg. You know the last thing Pete Buttigieg ran for before this? DNC chair. And he lost. And now he's the chair of the DNC. Now he wants to be president. There's a real question about who the Democrats have to figure out is right for this time with the level of experience up against a president who literally says out loud that he'll continue to seek foreign help so that it's not a fair election. So they really have to figure, I don't think it's about moderate versus liberal this year as much as it's about who can really handle that. I will say we went through the whole evening without any new rap quotes, and so for that I apologize.
Well, Ari, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks to all of you. If you want, I'll say hi to you, but I really thanks for coming. Really appreciate spending the evening with you.
All right, please join us for dessert reception outside in the lobby. Thank you.
We've never had a garage in our life.
Well, we didn't either until
The next one's going to be a goal.
Well, wipe that out.
Yeah, he's a silly boy.
Yeah.
Years ago, and she had grown up in the same neighborhood. His brother was in his brother would call every week. Yes, my mom, we go to shows every year, and that's her main goal. Even if she's never heard of it before, she'll, she'll listen to it and try to. Right, and if you're not able to hear it or understand what Yeah, he went No, they